Hello and welcome to the Planet Zoo Every Animal Franchise Zoo. Today's a roundup day where I'll be finishing off the animals that I didn't complete last time for the Oceania Pack. Last episode I added the first three, so Little Penguin, North Island Brown Kiwi and the Quokka. Today I want to finish off the pack and get the last two in, using up this space that's left at the side. So that'll be the Spectacled Flying Fox, which is a walk-through exhibit species, and the Tasmanian Devil, another small habitat animal, which makes my life a bit easier. So, slight change in the format of today's episode. I'm trying out something new. Normally with exhibit species, I'll just go ahead and build something and then showcase what that looks like at the end, without showing any kind of speed build. I've realised that cutting out so much of the build work, not just with the exhibit species, but also with habitat builds too, it's not really showing my thought process behind the builds. It's simply adding something and showing you what it looks like at the end without showing any of the process behind it. So a little change in that I'm trying to put this more in line with how other creators show their builds. If I'm going to do speed builds, I may as well commit and do it justice rather than cutting them down to the basics. My thought process is that people still watching this series, you've obviously watched all the way through if you've managed to get to episode 28. I doubt many people are here for the challenge anymore, and more likely people are still watching because they want to see what I'm creating. Originally when I started this series, I was honestly curious about whether it was even possible to fit every animal into one franchise zoo, whether the game could handle that many animals and how it would affect the economy. Safe to say, it's technically possible to add every animal, but it's becoming a huge burden and I'm artificially having to do so much stuff to get it to work. It's not going to hold up much longer. First is the cash situation. At one point, I think we had it was 26 million in cash. Well, that's now dropped to 12.5 million. I've had to limit guest numbers to 4,000 to handle the frame rate, and that's not enough to support such a large zoo. I've upped the price of tickets to get in to, I think it's $75 now for both adults and children, and that's about as much as they're prepared to pay. Any more than that and they refuse to come in. Even with that hefty ticket price, it's still just not enough guests to support the amount of stuff and the processing going on in this zoo. Second issue is the animal management. I think I've done really well to manage it to this point, but it's becoming unsustainable. For this video alone, I had to spend about an hour handling all the zoo management stuff. There's a notification about babies maturing every 30 seconds or so. So they need to be processed and either left in the trade centre or traded out of the zoo. There's also animals dying off. And what I was doing up to now, I was sourcing new animals in the trade market and replacing them to kickstart another round of breeding. With so many different species in the zoo now, I can't keep up with it all. And, well, at this point I've decided that where species die off, I'm just letting the habitats lay dormant rather than replacing them. Less animals in total in the zoo is helping the frame rate to a point, but even with that, it's getting far too difficult, even for me as an experienced player, to manage it all. So I am at a crossroads with how I manage the Every Animal Zoo. There's a couple of options I can take. The easiest solution would be to simply call it a day with franchise mode, convert the zoo to a sandbox zoo and turn off some of the management stuff, stop the animals breeding, and I wouldn't have to worry about cash. I'm not keen on that idea because I started this zoo as a franchise zoo and I've made it all this way to episode 28 with that format. It feels like such a shame for me to give up now and say I can't do it with franchise zoo. Another option that I looked into a while ago was setting up a recording PC. So having my gaming PC purely for running the game and have a second recording PC that handles the video processing so my PC isn't having to record and run the game at the same time. That does cause problems. Still not having as many issues when I'm just playing the game in franchise mode with this zoo. It's just as soon as I hit record, obviously the PC's having to do two workloads at the same time and it struggles. I do have some spare PC parts that I've kept from when I upgraded my own system. but it would still be a significant cost to set up a full additional recording PC. And I don't think I can justify what that would cost for recording just one game. If I was a daily streamer or something, it'd be easier to justify that, but recording 1 or 2 videos a week, and it's literally only this series that is causing me problems because there's so much going on to process. I'm not made of money, and I can't really justify that. My final option to this problem, and it's the solution that I'm going with at the moment, is building everything in the franchise zoo, and then when it's ready, I save the zoo as a sandbox zoo, and then using that to do the tours and stuff. For that to work, when I open the sandbox zoo version, I have to go in and literally trade out as many animals as I can, which at this point is about 800 animals. There are some that I can't trade out, so pregnant females and babies go into the trade centre, which leaves me with the animals in the habitats I've just created for that episode, and about 100 extra babies that won't fit in the trade centre. It's a big commitment to go through this rigmarole every episode, but it's the fairest way I know how to handle it without the video quality dropping too much, and still keeping in franchise mode. I'm trying out this method for this episode to see how it goes, and if it's still acceptable, then we'll carry on this way. It's just, if this is seen as cheating, then unfortunately that's the end of every animal franchise zoo, because I can't carry on with franchise mode to do all the recording in. It just won't work. Anyway, that's the issues I'm having with franchise mode. Back to the video format. The speed at which I was pumping out habitats for this zoo in the beginning, I can't keep up with that these days, and everything is going to be coming at a slower pace now. 2 or 3 habitats will be the norm going forward, and like I say, I'm trialling out keeping more of the speed build in the video rather than how I did these before, where I'd have, say, 10 hours of footage cut down to about 10 minutes. That's been a challenge in itself, going through the video footage frame by frame and seeking out only the most important elements. I'm still cutting back a little. For example, today's build took about 5 hours to complete, not including that hour spent on blooming animal management at first, but about 5 hours for the total build and stuff. So I am still cutting back significantly on what you guys see in the speed builds. It's just I'm going to increase it a little more to cover the whole build. Something I've struggled with before is keeping in mistakes. I've been too harsh in the editing with this, and it can come across as always having a plan and doing everything right the first time. Building habitats from scratch, it doesn't always go to plan, and I'll start working on something, decide it doesn't fit, or I don't like it, and I'll delete portions and start again. I've mostly always cut this out in the past, only showed what the final result ended up as. That's not realistic though. In reality, I still make mistakes and still have to rework stuff to fit in better, just like most players. Like today with the flying fox exhibit, a big mistake I made on this one, I moved the box off the world grid before I built the habitat shell. That means all the piece movement from that point onwards wasn't aligned with the grid, so it was a huge pain having to line everything up without being able to use the world grid for it to line up in place. I'm sure everyone struggles with that, and it's why I mostly build everything to align with the world grid at first, then move it into position when it's all built. So occasionally in this speed build, you've probably seen me struggle with having to intricately move something into place when normally I wouldn't have to do that. That's because it wasn't on the world grid and it was a right pain. Moving on to the Tasmanian Devil build, I decided to use up the rest of this space available in this corner and build them a larger habitat than they technically needed. Since this is the last animal in the Oceania pack, it felt like a good idea to close off this particular theming, and from next episode when I move on to the Eurasia animals, I can start that off in another block and a different theme. There's 5 habitats in total in here in the Oceania section, and just 1 work zone, so 1 keeper hut and whatnot serving all 5. That's about the maximum I'd recommend before you need to move on to a new work zone with all the relevant facilities in franchise mode, so it's actually worked out really well for this section. But every time I add a new work zone, that means hiring more staff, and it's just adding to the complexity of this zoo and tanking the frame rate further. When I get to the erasure animals, that'll be 8 more coming in, so I might try and fit them all in here with just one work zone for all 8. I know there's a few animals in that pack that can share a habitat, so it might all work out. After that, well, I'm assuming there's still DLC packs coming. We haven't heard anything about more packs, but we also haven't heard anything about there not being more packs, and that tends to be something that Frontier will announce when the end of the DLC packs is done. They'll have some sort of hooray for all the packs released or something. So I suspect there's going to be at least one more pack maybe before the game is done. Squeezing that into the zoo here? That's a future issue, figuring out where on earth any new animals are going to fit. I will of course get any new animals in eventually, and maybe I'll have caught up by the time a new pack is released. Anyway, back to the Tasmanian Devils. This habitat is coming out about double the size of what they would need as their minimum. I've only built for the Tasmanian Devils a couple of times before, once for the showcase zoo I made with the Oceania animals, and another one for the Starter Habitat series. I wasn't happy with either of those builds. The showcase one, I'd made a volcanic tropical island, and I squeezed the Tasmanian Devil habitat right onto the side of a mountain, so it was a weird, long, thin shape. For the starter habitats, the self-imposed restrictions I place on those habitats meant it was quite small and empty. For this one, I wanted this habitat to be more of a true reflection on the kind of biome the Tasmanian Devils reside in, and since I had so much extra room, I've been able to add more of a natural landscape without eating into the required navigable area for them. There's 2 hard shelters in this habitat. I probably could have gotten away with one, but I decided to have one for sleeping and one for food. Being that the habitat is quite large, I wanted spaces right by the barrier that the animals would gravitate towards, so where I'm keeping bedding and feeding trays. Likelihood is the animals will be around these areas more often than not, and that will provide a good viewing point for guests, because I'm sure if the animals were keeping to the middle of the enclosure, then guests would probably be constantly complaining about it having a poor view. The Tasmanian Devils also like a lot of foliage cover, so main feature I guess of this habitat, I spent much longer than I would do normally adding a lot of shrubs and grasses. Being such a tiny creature, I felt like adding the huge trees would look a bit disproportionate, so I've kept trees down, but increased the shrubs and grasses. Good thing with the grasses is that animals can traverse over them, so it's adding some depth to the habitat without eating into the navigable space. Wasn't quite sure whether the Tasmanian Devils like areas with lots of rocks, but I decided to add a few of these to add some depth. In terms of foliage, the Oceania Pack DLC added a bunch of options, so a lot more versatile than trying to build a habitat for them with the base game pieces. There's a bunch of plants in this habitat that I don't think I've used before. I did spend way more time than usual taking care and attention to where plants were positioned. Normally I'd always place plants with the align to surface turned off, and for the most part that works out. This habitat, I've adjusted the terrain a little so that it's not all flat, so that created a bit more work for me to have to align each individual plant with the terrain. But so worth it when the habitat is finished. Looks a lot better and more natural than it would otherwise. In general, I think I'm getting a little better at working out the foliage. It's only taken 4 years of consistent play, but we're getting there in the end. So all done now, this is the completed habitats today. Self-contained area and finishing off the Oceania Pack area quite nicely. Little bit of extra space here given to the Tasmanian Devils. Let them spread out a little bit to round off this section. Accesses off a few sides, and this way you get a great view over the whole habitat here, so really nice view there for guests. And here we go, one of the elusive Tasmanian Devils. Tiny animals, so sometimes difficult to see. There's 2 of them in here, so this is one of them. Can't see the other one just now. They'll be in here somewhere. Anyway, 2 hard shelters in this habitat. I've got one here which has got the feeding stations in, so my thoughts with this is to get the animals right up close to the barrier with this. Going to tackle the blood pumpkin here. Look at the size of the pumpkin compared to the size of the Tasmanian Devil. The animation can't even get close enough to the pumpkin. It's just eating air off the ground. Hey ho, small animals deserve pumpkins too. Anyway, you can see this is a big enclosure, and to make it not feel too empty, I've filled it with a bunch of foliage. Lots of planting this time around. Hey, and there's the second devil. I knew there was 2 of them in here. I got a bit worried then in case it might have escaped. Nope, just meandering somewhere in the background. And yeah, you can see how tiny they are compared to the size of the habitat. Hopefully the guests don't have a problem viewing them from here. That said, the guests are always a bit fussy when the animals are based a couple of meters further than they want them to be. Anyway, happy with how the habitat turned out. Now, if we go round to the back, this is the new walkthrough enclosure for the spectacled flying fox. So, around the back of the building, decorated appropriately all the way around the building, and entrance through the double doors here. And there we go, more bats. I can actually see one. Normally they're flying too fast. Hopefully if we can see the face. Yep, turn around. There we go. Oh, no, here we go. Yep, he's off. Must have known the camera was on them. Let's try that again. Yeah, just hanging around. Not doing much. I've only got 5 bats in here at the moment. There wasn't any more on the exhibit market, so sufficing with just 5 of them in here, but I think you can have up to about 30. Oh yeah, one feature I've got in here, I've put blacked out windows on both sides for this one. I thought that would fit in well, having the darkened glass on both sides rather than just one way. Best is minimal themed in here because it can mess up with the bats animations. So let us work our way out, and that's the flying foxes in. With the flying fox and the Tasmanian Devil in, that's all the Oceania animals now complete. I think I've done a relatively good job to squeeze them all into this end of the zoo. I was worried the theming might clash a bit with I think I've got some African species over the road, and I was worried they might not fit in, but I think it's made quite a nice little self-contained area all in its own right here. So, what's next? Next time I'll be delving into the Oceania Pack animals. So 8 more animals left to go. For that I'll be starting off a brand new section over here. So plenty of space around here for me to be able to work in all of those new animals. For the zoo in general, yeah, it's starting to get rather packed and not running perfectly on my system anymore. This is a trial of showcasing the builds in a sandbox zoo, so this has come straight from franchise. I've saved it as a sandbox zoo, and what we're seeing here is, well, most of the animals have been traded out of the zoo and moved elsewhere for now, so that we can actually view this without FPS doing crazy stuff. As ever, let me know what you think of the habitat builds in the comments, and also the new format that I've been running with this episode. Let me know if this is fine, or you'd rather me go back to doing quicker speed building sections. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you in the next episode.